Greetings once again. I am speaking to you from the Charlene classroom because I am unoriginal, except this time I have my lovely fairy Eos with me, who I will be insulting throughout the video. And the reason we will be doing that is because we're talking about Scholar today. Now, Scholar is a barrier healer, and since it shares like 80% of its abilities with Sage. So if you've already seen that video from me, it will sound very familiar for most of the video. Now, first things first, let's talk about Scholar's unique mechanics. The first one being the fairy, of course. The first thing you should do whenever you enter an instance is summon a fairy. You have the choice between summoning Eos or Selene. They are functionally the same, so it doesn't matter which one you pick. I always use Eos and I do not associate with Selene people. Now that I've forced 50% of the audience to leave, which isn't really a great idea now that I think about it, let's go over how to control the fairy. There's only two main buttons on the pet hotbar you're going to want to know to control the fairy. Either place to move them somewhere, or heal to go back to you. Now, all of fairy's abilities do come from the pet itself, so having it in different locations can affect who and who it will not hit. You pretty much just want to put it right in the center of a boss arena and let it do its thing. All the AoEs are going to come from it and you'll be able to hit most people. I will go over all of the fairy's healing abilities later when I get to the actual healing, but for now, let's move on to the next meter. Scholar has a wonderful meter called Ether Flow, where every 60 seconds you press the button Ether Flow to gain 3 stacks of it. I call it wonderful because if you're like me, I drift this button all the time. Now, outside of having to manually press the button to gain the pips, this meter works the same way as Sage's. You get the same amount of pips per the same amount of time, and pretty much all the abilities are the same, as I'll go over later. Just don't drift the button, I swear, please don't do it. It also gives you 2000 mana, so if you do not press this button, you are liable to run out of mana. The last gauge is the fairy gauge. This is basically increased by 10 every time you do an Ether Flow ability while your fairy is out. That is very important. Your fairy needs to be out to gain the meter. Other than that, it's only used for one ability, which I'll go over later with the other fairy abilities. Now, as is essential for healers, let's go over the damage abilities. The main button you are going to be spamming every 2.5 seconds is Broil 4. This is your basic bread and butter. It does a potency of 295 every time you attack, so make sure you are spamming this. Your damage over time ability is called Biolysis. It is 700 potency over the duration of 30 seconds, so just make sure that this is applied all the time. Now, Scholar has another GCD, a single target attack called Ruin 2. It is an instant cast spell, however, it does less damage. It does a potency of 220 compared to Broil's 295. So basically, you only want to use this if you really have to move, or if you really have to double weave in that particular instance. Our last GCD is Artivore 2, and it does a potency of 180 to all enemies near you. Spam this on 2 or more targets. Now that's all for the GCDs, but Scholar actually has a raid buff. Every 2 minutes, you will press Change Stratagem, which will increase the crit rate on the target by 10%. The only downside to this ability is that it does not synergize very well with jobs that have guaranteed critical hits built in, since you will not be helping them in any way. And while it is hard to quantify this compared to other flat percent increase buffs, this is still a good buff to have, so make sure you do this every 2-minute burst window. Next up, we're talking about GCD heals. Physic is a 450 potency cure that is garbage. Do not use this. Instead, we will mainly be using Adloquium. It is a 300 potency cure that has a 540 potency shield attached. This is a lot better. And if it crits, it's better. Not only does the shield get the crit modifier, but you also get a second shield of the same amount. It is way better than Physic. Do keep in mind the cast time is 2 seconds with a recast of 2.5, meaning that you cannot weave after this without clipping your GCD. Now there are 2 reasons I bring this up. 1, it's just kind of annoying, and 2, there is an ability that you should do after using Adloquium. It is called Deployment Tactics. You use this on whoever has Adloquium, and it will spread their Galvanize shield, not the crit shield, to everyone else. Since this will clip your GCD if used immediately after Adloquium, the best places to use this is when you really need it and you use a swift cast Adlo into Deployment Tactics, or you do it pre-pool. Having a spicy pre-pull crit shield will pretty much negate whatever the first raid-wide that comes out is. Now, Deployment Tactics is on a 90-second cooldown, so we are not going to be using this all the time. So let's go over the regular group shield instead. Our group shield is Sucker. It is a 200 potency cure with a 160% shield, equaling 320. In total, it is 520 potency. Scholar does not have a regular heal in a group like Sage does, so this does heal more health than Sage's variant, but their shield is of equivalent size. And just like Sage, try not to use this without giving it some kind of boost, one of which I'll go over later, because it is kind of a small amount. You shouldn't never use it, but remember, it's not that big of a shield. And of course, if you have Deployment Tactics up, try to use that instead of Sucker. And of course, we have the obligatory turns the shields into HP ability. However, unlike Pepsis, this one is a lot more useful and easier to use. It is called Emergency Tactics. This will turn the next Adloquium or Sucker you use into only HP restoring moves. This will turn their shields, including the crit shield from Adloquium, into raw health. This is on a 15-second cooldown, so you can use this pretty often. It's got that nice ease of use, and it is to be used before you do the spell, not after like Pepsis. And since these are pretty much one-to-one conversions in values, you pretty much just want to use them in the same scenarios, except if they've already got the kind of shield you're going to put on, you can do this, and you will not overwrite it or lose out on some healing. And don't forget to use Swift Cast with Resurrection in case anybody dies. Now, let's move on to the fairy heals. These are, for all intensive purposes, are resourceless off-global abilities. However, they do of course require the fairy, and there is one that uses the fairy gauge, but it's not super complicated. But it does have that nice nuance that I will go over. So the first one, which will require absolutely no input from you, is Embrace. Anytime anyone in your party is missing any health, they will target whoever is lowest and do a 180 potency cure. Now, just like Sage's Cardia, this is not the end-all be-all of healing, but it can help alleviate some of the stress for you. This will happen every 3 seconds, and it will never be noticed, but you will sometimes appreciate it. Unlike Sage's Cardia, it does not stay on the tank at all times. It will target whoever's lowest, so it can be a bit finicky like that, but you've got other tools for that, so it's okay. Now, next up we have Whispering Dawn. It is an 80 potency regen for 21 seconds that will come directly from where the fairy is. Now, this is on a 60-second cooldown, so you are going to want to use this quite frequently, but you may notice that it has kind of a smaller potency per tick. It's still good, and the fact that it lasts longer is nice, but it might not be fast enough to heal people up in between faster mechanics like other regens. In the end, this is 560 potency, so do make sure to do this. Now, if you need raw healing, you have Fey Blessing. This is a 320 potency cure flat. It will come out where the fairy is, and it is a good heal. However, there is a caveat with it, which I will go over later. Next, we have Fey Illumination. This isn't exactly a heal, but I figured this was the best place to put it. This will boost the healing magic potency of everyone by 10%. This is not the healing they received. This is the magic healing that they do will go up. This only affects GCD heals. Along with that, everybody will get 5% magic damage taken reduction. It's not a lot, but it does help with raid-wide, so make sure to do this when you can. Next up is Fairy's Aether Pact and Fey Union ability. Executing Aether Pact will add a tether from the fairy to whoever is being targeted, and the fairy will heal them for 300 potency every tick, like a regen. This will use up 10 fairy meter every tick. In total, that is a 3000 potency regen over 30 seconds if you have max meter, but do keep in mind that you do not have the access to other fairy abilities while doing this. You will cancel it if you do other fairy abilities. Outside of using another fairy ability, you can cancel it manually by pressing Dissolve, which Aether Pact will turn into while the ability is being used. Now we're going to move on to Summon Seraph. This is on a 2-minute cooldown, and it allows you to, as it says, summon Seraph. This does require the fairy to be out. Now, there is a lot of text for this, but to put it simply, for 22 seconds your fairy will be buffed, and you'll have access to an additional move. The fairy gauge will change to display this timer. Now before we get into the upgraded abilities, I just want to mention that you lose access to Fey Blessing and Aether Pact Fey Union when you summon Seraph. You cannot use Fairy Meter while Seraph is out. You can still gain it, you just cannot use it. And for some reason, you can't do Fey Blessing. I want to say it's a weird holdover from when Fey Blessing used to cost meter in the previous expansion. I don't know why they haven't changed this. And now for the actual upgrades. Embrace is upgraded to Seraphic Veil. It is the same cure potency, however you gain a shield equal to the same amount, so you're actually doubling the healing. As for Whispering Dawn and Fey Illumination, they just change into Seraphic Illumination and Angel's Whisper. These are the same exact abilities, just with a fancy different name. And now, while Fey Blessing has been removed, we have a new button called Consolation. You get 2 of these every time you summon Seraph, and they are a 250 potency cure with an equivalent shield attached. That's totaling 500, so it's pretty good. That's 1000 potency per Seraph. Pretty much just use Seraph when you know you're going to take back-to-back heavy instances of damage over at least 22 seconds. That way you get the full effect. Last up, we have the Ether Flow abilities. Again, if you've seen the Sage video, these are going to look very familiar. The first one is Lustrate. This is a 600 potency cure that costs 1 Ether Flow, and you pretty much just want to weave this in whenever anybody needs some single target healing. Next up is Indomitability, mostly shortened to Indom whenever anyone talks about it. This is a 400 potency group cure that, once again, just use this whenever you need to do some group healing, and you don't have Fey Blessing up either. Next up is Excogitation, normally shortened to Excog whenever anybody talks about it. This will give somebody a buff that either when it runs out or they are below half HP, it will heal them for a potency of 800. Its duration is the same as its recast time, so you can kind of have this up perpetually if you want, but it's usually just good to put it on the main tank. Do keep in mind that it will not stop them from being one-shot. It will not heal them if their health would have hit 0 when they got hit. Also can be used to heal up somebody who just got raised, since they will be below half HP. And for the last of our Aetherflow heals, we have Sacred Soil. Sacred Soil is a ground targeted ability, so it is a bit finicky to use sometimes, but it is a good regen with 500 potency in total, as well as a 10% mit for anybody who stands in it. Also, just because of how ground target abilities work, this does do an additional 100 tick of healing when you put it down, so it's actually 600 in total. You pretty much just want to do this whenever you can, and you know you don't need a move. It's a pretty good regen as well as mitigation, so. And for our very final Aetherflow ability, we have Energy Drain. This is an off-global attack with a potency of 100, and you heal a portion of that damage. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it appears to be like half of that damage, but nobody has ever used Energy Drain for the healing aspect, so don't worry about that. Now you may be wondering where to use this ability when you have all these other heals to use. Oh, I know, Mr. YouTuber guy. You want to use them all the time because you want to do optimal damage as a scholar. You just want to do 3 energy drains every minute. That's a whole 300 potency per minute. Well, my talking staff friend, yeah, you can do that. But the developer intended way to use this, probably, is to just do it when you are about to get your Aetherflow back off cooldown and you have some extra pips and you don't need to do any healing. You could just very well lustrate, much like you would Druacole on Sage, but instead of overhealing and doing nothing, you can damage the enemy and it'll be that much faster. Part of being a good scholar is knowing when you can get away with doing energy drain instead of healing. I am not one of those, so I will either never use my energy drains and accidentally use Ether Flow when I have all 3 stacks, or I'll just do Energy Drain until I'm out of heals, and then I can't heal people because I'm bad at this game. Now you may be wondering if you have ways to get any extra pips outside of the minute window Ether Flows. There is, but doing so comes at a great price, and I would not do this ability lightly. The ability is Dissipation. Dissipation is on a whopping 180-second recast timer. This is also known as Eating the Fairy, and I will address it as such. Eating the Fairy will give you 3 Aether Flow pips immediately, as well as a 20% boost to all healing spells. However, you will be unable to do fairy actions for 30 seconds, including gaining meter for using Aether Flow abilities. And yes, that did say healing spells, meaning that the Aether Flow abilities you just got because of the pips are not boosted at all. I don't know who designed this. And if you're all about that spicy damage number, you can do 3 energy drains with these pips as well. And lastly, we have Recitation. This isn't exactly just for Ether Flow abilities, but I did want to include it at the end here after I've done everything else. On a 90-second cooldown, this will make your next Adloquium, Sucker, Indom, or Excog not use any resources, as well as being a critical heal. This is especially good pre-pull if you just want to do a guaranteed crit Adloquium into a deployment tactics, or if during the middle of a fight you need to get the critical Indom healing in a group. And lastly, we've got 2 miscellaneous abilities that I didn't really have a place to put them. First off, we have Protraction. On a 60-second cooldown, this will increase somebody's HP by 10%, as well as making them recover 10% more health with healing actions. Honestly, I find this best to use with tank busters, but I also find it pretty good in conjunction with Aether Pact. It's just a really good boost in healing when you do it like that. You can also just put this on somebody who was just raised, and it will heal them oh so slightly. It feels a lot better than using Crisis on Sage. I like this ability a lot better. And lastly, we have probably the best ability ever created, the Zoomies. Expedience is an ability that is on a 2-minute recast timer, and it will give you a 10% mitigation for 20 seconds. But more importantly, it will give you the effect of Sprint for 10 seconds to all members of the party. You just want to use this when you need a move. When you need a zoom, you press this button. However, just because it's coupled with a move speed buff doesn't mean you shouldn't use this even if you have to stand still. It is a 10% mit, so use it when you have to. And that's how you play Scholar. It's super simple. All you need to do is make sure you are doing Ether Flow every minute so that you do not run out of mana, do change stratagem every 2 minutes to help your team get some more damage in, and mit and heal accordingly. Nothing super complicated. And yeah, that last point was a little vague, but trust me, you're just going to have to practice with these tools before you get the swing of it. I constantly drift my Ether Flow and my Ether Flow heals and my Aether Pact healing and everything in between, and yet I've managed to clear some fights. So you know, it can't be that bad. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.
Look, man, my point is I just think it's a little creepy how you just
Hey, are we talking about the Shisui set? Hi.
You know, I think you were right, Alex. Only weirdos wear that set. I don't know why I ever wore it in the first place.